Hello class, welcome to this another discussion video. So this time we are now on the second line item in our statement of financial position. So we have trade and other receivables. So for YOLO A of weeks 6 to 7, I decided to divide the discussion into two parts. So this video is the first of the two videos that I'll be sending you to discuss topics about trade and other receivables. So the other video will be for accounts receivable. So basically in this video, I will be discussing with you the general concepts applicable to trade and other receivables, and then the second video will focus naman on the concepts pertaining to accounts receivable. So the unit learning's outcomes for this topic, so we have here at the end of this lesson, you should be able to first differentiate trade and other receivables. So second, you should be able to identify items to be included in the one line item trade and other receivables. So I guess that's a very essence of this topic, for us or for you to be able to identify which of the items should be included in that one line item trade and other receivables para maging appropriate or correct yung presentation natin sa financial statements. So as your guide, we have here four parts of the discussion. So first, we will have muna the definition of the word receivables. Second is we are to decide what will be, or we have to identify how are we going to classify our trade and other receivables or our receivables in the statement of financial position. Are they gonna be considered as current or non-current? The third one is the presentation. So meaning how are we going to present our item or our account on the face of the financial statements. And then lastly, we'll have the measurement, or we will learn at what amount or how much should be the assigned peso value of the account. Okay, so let us start. So let's start with the definition. So let us define first receivables. So as defined here, receivables generally are financial assets that represent a contractual right to receive cash or another financial asset from another entity. So in short, ito yung mga kokolektahin natin. Meron tayong contractual right because initially there was an agreement, whether formal or written or oral lang na agreement. Now, receivables can be classified into two. It can be classified as a trade receivable or a non-trade receivables. So, ano bang kaibahan ng dalawa? So, pag sinabi nating trade receivables, so this refers to claims arising from sale of merchandise or services in the ordinary course of business. So, meaning the usual na ating receivable na mag-a-arise because of our normal operations. So, common examples for this trade receivables or accounts receivable, tsaka yung notes receivable. So, as we know, accounts receivable are open accounts arising from the sale of goods and services in the ordinary course of business, and this is not supported by a promissory note. So in short, this is just an oral no agreement between the parties involved. Other names for accounts receivable. So if you may happen to encounter customers' accounts, trade debtors, trade accounts receivable, they are referring to the accounts receivable. The other example of trade receivable is notes receivable. So, notes receivable naman is more formal, no? In the sense that this is supported by formal promises to pay in the form of notes. So, meaning, yung nangutang ay nagpirma talaga ng promissory notes. So, there is really a written agreement, no, as to how much was borrowed, no, or how much was granted to the borrower, and maybe it will be specified also there the terms, no, as to the interest or kung kailan babayaran yung pagkakautang. So just take note that yung since no yung trade receivable sabi niya diyan it arises from the sale of merchandise or services in the ordinary course of business. So ibig sabihin magdedepende pala yung classification ng receivable sa nature ng operations ng entity. Like for example, kapag merchandising concern, very common yung accounts receivable tsaka notes receivable kasi normal talaga nila na mag-a-arise na receivable because magpapautang sila, no? They'll be extending credit to their customers. Now, for banks, for example, or other financial institutions, para sa kanila naman, ang trade receivables no para sa kanila is in the form of loans receivable. Why? Because no banks primarily no yung pinaka nature ng business ng bangko ay magpapautang ng pera no sa mga customers no or iba't ibang klaseng mga clients nila. So after knowing the definition of trade receivable, so it's now very obvious naman no kung so pag sinabi natin non-trade receivables, this represent claims arising from the sources other than sale of merchandise or services in the ordinary course of business. So lahat ng receivables na hindi naman galing sa usual course of business ng entity, then non-trade receivable na sila. So, common examples nito yung mga advances to employees or officers, no, or advances sa affiliates or mga claims ng insurance, no. So, we will discuss those mga examples ng non-trade receivables later after we have discuss no the classification and presentation of our receivables para mas makarelate na tayo and we will be more mindful as to their classification kasi magmamatter yun doon sa presentation ng ating receivables no, in the statement of financial position. So, let us proceed muna to classification. So again, classification here, we have to identify kung ano ba ang receivable na to. Is it to be classified as current or non-current? So yung classification ng receivable ay magdedepende kung anong klaseng receivable siya. Whether it is a trade receivable or a non-trade receivable. So kapag ang receivable are classified or considered as trade receivables, they are considered current only when they are expected to be realized in cash no, within the normal operating cycle or 1 year, whichever is longer. So, normally, no, when we say current, no, yung realization, no, or ang conversion ng receivable to cash, usually sabi natin, it should be 1 year. However, in some cases wherein the normal operating cycle of an entity is extended, no, for more than 1 year. So just take note that dito, kapag trade receivable pala, even if ang term, no, or ang pag-realize, ang pagkolekta ng receivable ay mag-beyond siya ng 1 year so long as it is normal or it is within the normal operating cycle of the entity, then that still would be considered as current. So, for example, no, for mga appliance center, no, for example, wherein meron silang mga receivables, no, mga installment receivable na mag-extend or sobra sa 1 year yung term. So, for example, usually sa kanila, nagpapautang sila ng 2 years ang term. So, yung installment receivable na yon, that can still be classified as current, no, even if, no, it is beyond the 1 year kasi it is within the normal operating cycle of the entity. So again, tandaan, kapag trade receivables, it can still be considered as current, no? For as long as it is expected to be realized or collected, no, within the normal operating cycle or 1 year, whichever is longer. Now, for non-trade receivables, they are considered as current when they are expected to be realized in cash within 1 year, notwithstanding the length of the operating cycle. So take note of that, no? So this time, take note that ang pagbabasehan lang talaga natin, no, kapag non-trade receivable siya, ay yung 1 year. No? Pag makolekta siya within 1 year, no, hindi na natin i-consider ang operating cycle. So, pag non-trade receivable, disregard na natin yung operating cycle. No? So, as long as it is realizable or collected within 1 year, that is considered current. So, how do we present, no, trade receivables and non-trade receivables in the statement of financial position? So, based on our PFRS, so we have here trade receivables and non-trade receivables, which are currently collectible, shall be presented in the face of the statement of financial position as one-line item called Trade and Other Receivables, the details of which shall be disclosed in the notes to financial statements. So, ibig sabihin pala, class, no, it is very important for us to identify whether the item is current ba, no? So, dapat ma-identify talaga natin na ay itong trade receivable na to current, itong non-trade receivable na to ay current ito. Kasi regardless kung trade receivable siya or non-trade receivable siya, as long as current, then it should be included in the caption Trade and Other Receivables. So, yun lang yung appear on the face of the financial statements. Ang detalye, yung breakdown, no, kung ano yung laman ng Trade and Other Receivables na yan, makikita na lang natin sa notes to financial statements. Okay, so let us now proceed to the examples of non-trade receivables. Kasi sabi ko kanina, importante, no, na ma-identify natin yung non-trade receivable kung ito ba ay considered as current or non-current. So, current kapag collectible within 1 year. Otherwise, it will be considered non-current. So, pag non-current, ibig sabihin, hindi siya dapat isama doon sa caption ng trade and other receivables. So, first in the list, no, in the non-trade receivables is itong advances to or receivables from shareholders, directors, officers, or employees. So, in short, no, kasama na dyan yung mga cash advances. So, take note if this one is collectible within 1 year. So, such advances or receivable should be classified as current asset. Now, pag hindi naman sinabi doon sa problem, our assumption is this is collectible within 1 year. So, therefore, i-consider natin siya as current na asset. So, meaning part siya ng trade and other receivables na line item. So, kapag hindi siya collectible within 1 year, then that should be excluded from your trade and other receivable kasi it will be classified as non-current assets. Second is ito, advances to affiliates. So, ano ba yung affiliates, no? If you are familiar with the mga sister companies, no? Yung, or subsidiaries. So, companies which are affiliated to each other. Like, for example, pag sinabi nating o University of Mindanao, affiliated siya sa Radyo Ukay, no? Or affiliated siya sa na multi-test, no, na nasa Davao. So, for example, no, multi-test will borrow money from then that will be considered as advances to affiliates by So, yung advances na yan, usually ang treatment niyan class ay long-term investment. So, ibig sabihin, non-current yan. No? Yun yung ating assumption kapag advances to affiliates, no, tapos wala nang ibang information na binigay. So, we usually treat that as long-term na investment. So, therefore, hindi siya kasama sa caption ng trade and other receivables. Next would be advances to suppliers for the acquisition of merchandise. So, yan, no? Nag-advance tayong magbayad sa supplier. So, advances to supplier is considered current asset. Another example of a non-trade receivable is subscription receivables. No? So, if you can still recall, sa ACC 111 na topic, no, sa corporation specifically, 'di ba? Mayroong mga shareholders na magso-subscribe lang muna pero hindi pa magpo-fully pay ng kanilang hinobscribe, no, or subscriptions nila ng shares. So, if you can still recall again, di ba, our entry for that is magde-debit tayo ng subscriptions receivable, tapos magka-credit tayo ng subscribe share capital. No? So, yung subscriptions receivable na yan, take note that it will be considered as current, no? Mape-present siya as part ng trade and other receivables if that subscriptions receivable is collectible within 1 year. So, kung collectible siya within 1 year, then it is current and therefore part ng trade and other receivables na line item. However, if that subscriptions receivable is not collectible within 1 year, then ang presentation niya class ay a deduction siya from your subscribed share capital, of which nasa equity section na yon, no? Hindi na siya part ng assets ng or current assets ng company. So again, take note unique for subscriptions receivable. Pag collectible within 1 year, current siya. Pero kapag collectible siya beyond 1 year, then it will be shown as a deduction from your subscribed share capital, no, under your equity section. Next would be the creditor's account, no, with debit balances arising from overpayment. So, ano yung creditor's account? So, ibig sabihin, class, we're referring actually to accounts payable, no? So, yung accounts payable, di ba normally, we have a credit balance. Now, if ever ang customer natin or ang creditor natin, no, nasobrahan tayo ng bayad. Okay, 'di ba tayo may pagkakautang kasi accounts payable to. So sobra tayo ng payment or baka nakabayad na tayo tapos later meron tayong na-return na goods sa kanila. So it will really result to a debit balance ng accounts payable. So just take note class that kapag nagka-debit balance yung accounts payable mo. So, that's a creditor's account no, with debit balances. So, just take note that they are classified as current assets. So, hindi sila, no, generally or theoretically, hindi siya pwedeng i-offset no, doon sa ibang accounts payable mo. So, remember the basic rule na bawal ang offsetting ng asset tsaka liability. So, okay pang mag-offset ng revenue tsaka expense, but no na mag-offset ka ng asset tsaka liability. So, generally, pag merong debit balance ng accounts payable, it should be presented as current asset, no? Part siya ng trade and other receivables. Although, class, no, take note that there is also an exception to the rule, no? If the amount of the debit balance is not material, so kung maliit lang naman, like piso lang or depende, no? Kasi sabi na rin, materiality is relative. No, walang absolute amount na makakapagsabi ka na material na yung amount. So, magdedepende yan sa laki ng company. So, but the general rule if the amount is not material, then it can be offsetted no, with credit balances or creditor's account with credit balances. And only the net accounts payable may be presented. But again, that is if immaterial na yung amount. But kapag nag-answer kayo ng problem, you cannot really say that, this is immaterial, so I will just offset it. No. If you happen, no, or if you encounter creditor's account with debit balances or simply stated, kapag nagka-debit balance yung accounts payable mo, then it should be presented talaga as current asset, no? At hindi siya i-offset doon sa iyong mga accounts payable na may credit balance pa. Okay? So, next would be yung special deposits natin, no? So, for the special deposits, so, ano naman ito, no? Special deposits and contract bids. So, this normally are classified as current assets because ganitong klaseng deposits are likely to remain outstanding no, for a considerable long period of time. No? Kasi 'di ba ito, meron pang dadaan ng proseso ng bidding, for example. So, usually long-term siya. So, however, the deposits that are collectible currently should be classified as current assets na. So, ganun din yung concept niya. So, pag hindi na sinabi kung collectible within 1 year ba, so ang ating assumption ay long-term siya. So, meaning, hindi siya kasama doon sa caption na trade and other receivable. Pero pag sinabi, pero meron ka information na such deposit can be retrieved or is refundable and can be collected within 1 year, then you can classify it as current asset. So that is special deposits no, on contract bids. Another is yung accrued income natin. No? So for our accrued income, ano bang example ng accrued income? So, accrued income, example niya, yung dividend receivable, for example, or yung accrued rent receivable, no? Or yung accrued royalties receivable, or yung accrued interest receivable. So, usually, they are classified as current assets. So, ito yung mga income na na-earn mo na pero hindi mo pa sila na-kolekta. So, normally, they are current assets. So, therefore, added siya or included siya doon sa caption ng Trade and Other Receivables. So, the last one is itong claims receivable, no? So, claims receivable, claims against common carriers, for example, for losses or damages, or claims for rebates, for example, or tax refunds, claims from insurance entity. So, these are normally classified as current assets. So, kapag naka-encounter kayo ng claims receivable, then they are included in the caption, trade and other receivables, because current sila. No? Mga non-trade receivables which are current should be included in that caption, trade and other receivables. So let us have this customers credit balances. Or pag sinabi natin customers credit balances, ang ibig sabihin nun, we are referring to the accounts receivable naman. So accounts receivable naman tayo. So pag sinabi natin credit balance, no, what happened? 'Di ba usually yung accounts receivable natin, meron tayong debit balance. Now, when there are overpayments, no, ng customer natin, or kung ang customer natin ay nag-return or nagbayad ng advance, no, so yung accounts receivable natin ay magkakaroon ng credit balance. So, ano bang treatment no, kapag meron tayong credit balance ng accounts receivable? So, take note, class, no, that it should be classified, no, the customer's credit balance should be classified as current liability. No? So, and it shall not be offset against the other receivables with debit balances. So, bawal ang offsetting, no, as what we have mentioned before. So, let us have here an illustration about the treatment no, ng customers' credit balances. So, suppose an entity reported in its trial balance, accounts receivable, at 250,000. So, ito yung balanse ng ating accounts receivable na you have 250,000. So, check lang natin, um, ano ba ang components, no? Bakit naging 250,000 yan? So, looking at the subsidiary ledger or subsidiary ledgers of accounts receivable, so nakita natin na kaya pala 250,000 ay dahil no, dito sa 50,000 no, na credit balance ng customer B. So, ito pala yung components ng ating accounts receivable. So, customer A has a debit balance of 300,000, whereas customer B has a credit balance of 50,000. No? Nasobrahan na yung bayad ni customer B kasi meron siyang return na 50,000 after na nakabayad siya ng 400,000. So, meron siyang credit balance. So, parang ang nangyari, that's 300,000 debit minus 50,000 credit. So, meron siyang 250,000 no, na outstanding balance or open balance. So, parang 300,000 dito na debit, tsaka 50,000 na credit. So, that is why meron siyang net amount na debit na 250,000. So, question, tama ba na 250,000 yung present niya as balanse no, ng kanyang accounts receivable? So, the answer is wrong. No? So, mali. Mali yun. Bakit? Kasi, as what we have learned kanina, dapat yung 50,000 natin na credit balance ng customer should be presented separately as a current liability. So, what will remain in your accounts receivable should be 300,000. Ito lang si customer A. So, to correct that mistake no, or error, dapat ang ipapresent natin sa accounts receivable natin should be 300,000. Tapos yung kay customer B, i-present natin siya as liability naman, no? So, liability na yan. So, what will be presented under your caption, accounts receivable, and specifically under the one-line item, trade and other receivables, is only this accounts receivable amounting to 300,000. So, hindi natin i-offset yung 50,000 natin na credit balance ng ating customer B. So, we are now in our last part of the presentation. So, let's have the measurement naman. So, at what amount are we going to record our receivables? So, just take note, class, that when we talk about measurement, dalawa ito, no? So, first is yung tinatawag natin na initial measurement. So, pag sinabi natin initial measurement, ito yung time kung saan first time nating i-report or i-recognize ang isang item or ang isang account. So, that's initial measurement. So, pag-record mo or pag-recognize mo, at what amount ba no, dapat na i-assign ko sa account na to? The other one is subsequent measurement. So, pag sinabi natin subsequent measurement, ibig sabihin, magkano na yung amount na i-report natin for this particular account every end of the reporting period. So, meaning, nag-cut off na December 31. So, ibig sabihin, no, meron akong balance doon na accounts receivable. So, December 31 na. So, I have to identify, I have to assign the appropriate peso value na i-assign ko doon sa accounts receivable na yon. No, magkano ba dapat ang ipipresent ko na accounts receivable sa aking financial statements, no, at the reporting date. So, that is subsequent measurement naman. Okay, so, let's discuss first yung measurement sa initial recognition. No? So, what is the initial measurement? Generally, no, of a receivable. So, we have here, sabi niya, no, initially, receivable should be measured at fair value plus transaction cost. So, itong mga transaction cost na to, these are the expenses that you incurred which are directly attributable to the acquisition, no, of that receivable. So, lahat ng nagastos mo in relation to that receivable should be included in the initial measurement. So, magwa-wonder tayo, anong ibang ibig sabihin ng fair value dito? So, fair value of a financial asset is actually, no, the transaction price. So, that's the usual, no? It is usually the transaction price. So, meaning it's the fair value of the consideration that you have given. So, for example, in a transaction of credit sales or sales on account. So, ikaw as seller, nagkaroon ka ng accounts receivable. And 'di ba in exchange of that accounts receivable, you have given up your inventory or your merchandise inventory. So, yung fair value na tinatawag natin dito is equivalent to the fair value of the consideration that you have given. So, in our example, magkano ba ang fair value ng merchandise inventory natin na ibinigay? So, that's your transaction price. Another is, no, for short-term receivables, our initial measurement will be equivalent to the face amount or the original invoice amount. So, take note, class, that etong short-term na receivables, no, we do not discount them. So, pag i-discount, meaning mag-compute ka ng present value. So, we do not discount short-term receivables simply because the effect of discounting is usually immaterial, no? Kapag, di ba, take note, the longer the period, the larger the effect of the discounting. Pero since naman, kung short-term ito, meaning collectible lang within 1 year, so that discounting effect niya or the effect of discounting would not be that material. So accordingly, take note that in case of accounts receivable, it will be measured initially at face amount or original invoice amount. Okay, what about subsequent measurement? Generally, according to PFRS 9, it shall be measured at amortized cost. However, class, no, the term amortized cost is more applicable to long-term no, na note receivable. So that is why no, for accounts receivable, ang preferable natin na term na gamitin ay net realizable value. So for accounts receivable, again, ang gamitin natin na term ay net realizable value. So yung net realizable value na yan, that is the amount of cash no, that we expect to collect no, from that accounts receivable or what we call the estimated recoverable amount of your accounts receivable. So we will discuss that in detail in the second part of this video, which will talk about accounts receivable no, in detail naman. Before ending this presentation, let me discuss with you a problem which will cover the items that we have discussed previously and to address also the objective of this presentation, which is to be able to identify trade and other receivables and most importantly to identify items which should be included in the caption trade and other receivables. This is a problem from the book of Conrado Vallex, no, Intermediate Accounting Volume 1, 2019 edition. So we have here sample company reported receivables account no, with a debit balance of 2 million at year end. So it also reported an allowance for doubtful accounts with a credit balance of 50,000 on the same date. So this is the details of the subsidiary. No, yung receivables niya na account, ito yung components niya, no? This comprise the receivables na ledger of the company. So yung requirement, no, you compute the amount to be presented as trade and other receivables under current assets. So we have here, no, isa-isahin natin. So ano ba yung mga items dito na included, no? Or tama ba na i-report natin ang buong 2 million kasi ito yung kanyang record, no? Meron siyang record na 2 million. So, yung 2 million na ba yan? Yan na ba yung amount na i-report natin sa ating financial statements? So, first thing that you have to notice no, or to observe in this problem is that firstly, mali na siya because supposedly this accounts here um, should have no a specific ledger. So iba yung ledger ng trade accounts receivable, iba yung trade receivable. So they should have different no na ledgers to be maintained. Now, ang ginawa nila ang ginawa ng entity na to, nilista niya lahat no sa account title na receivables, of which alam natin no na based sa accounting 111 or ACC 111, so dapat hindi no kasi we have to maintain separate ledgers for specific account. So yan pa lang mali na siya. So that needs an adjustment. Unahin na natin no yung pag-identify ano ba dito ang kasama sa ating caption na trade and other receivables. So most probably trade accounts receivable are included. So, kasama yan, no? 775,000. Kasi that's, sinabi na nga, no? Trade accounts receivable. So, usually that is current. Another is your trade notes receivable. So, kasama na rin yan. Now, ito, installment receivable, meron siyang information na binigay. Normally due 1 to 2 years daw, 300,000. So question, are we gonna include 300,000 in our caption trade and other receivables? So let us answer first the question, is this current or non-current? What kind of receivable is this? Is this trade receivable or non-trade receivable? So first is, this is a trade receivable. No? So is it current or not? So sabi niya dito, normally due siya, no, within 1 year to 2 years. So therefore, it is suggesting that the operating cycle of the entity is will go beyond 1 year. So since it is a trade receivable and it is still within the normal operating cycle, so therefore this one is still considered as current and therefore included in the caption trade and other receivables. Simply because, again, kapag trade receivable yan, it can still be considered as current if it is collectible within 1 year or within the normal operating cycle, no, whichever is longer. So, yung 2 years na yan, so still within the normal operating cycle, so kasama pa rin yung installment receivable. Another is customer's account reporting credit balances arising from sales returns. So, ito, accounts receivable, no, kasi customer's account, accounts receivable pero nagka-credit balance. So, take note, this one, no, anong reason na nagka-credit balance siya? Because maybe nag-overpayment or merong na-return, no, tapos nakabayad na siya before. So, nagka-credit balance yung customer's account. So, this one, take note, should not be included. So, X yan. Instead, it should be classified as current. Current ano siya? Current liability. No? So, dapat part siya ng current liability. So, another is advance payments for purchase of merchandise. So, nagbayad tayo ng advances to suppliers. So, that one is current. Current yan na asset. So, take note no, non-trade siya, pero current siya na asset. So, next is ito, no? Customer's account reporting credit balances arising from advance payment. So, yan, no? Nagka-credit balance na naman because of advance payment. So, again, this one is still not included. So, same lang sa kanina, it should be classified as current liability or it should be presented as current liability. Another is cash advance sa subsidiary. So, this one class is not included also. Why? Because we consider this as non-current asset. No? It's a long-term investment. So, hindi siya kasama doon sa caption na trade and other receivables. Next is claim from insurance entity. So, eto no, mga claims natin is included because this one is considered current, no? Generally current siya. So, kasama siya doon sa caption ng trade and other receivables. So, next would be subscriptions receivable due in 60 days. So, since sabi niya dito due in 60 days, so ibig sabihin class, no, na this one is current. So, take note kapag current ang subscription, no, or a subscription receivable, then kasama siya sa caption ng trade and other receivable. So, otherwise, deduction siya from your subscribed share capital in the equity section. So, dito kasama siya kasi current, no, this is a non-trade receivable na current kasi collectible within 1 year. Then lastly, you have your accrued interest receivable. So your accrued interest receivable, take note this is current. Now this is the usual accrued income. So we consider that as current. Okay? So if you're going to add all of those items na chinek natin na mga kasama, you'll have 775,000, you have 100,000, you have 300,000, you have 150,000, you have 15,000, you have 300,000, you have 10,000. So that will tally to 1,650,000. So let us not forget that we have an allowance for doubtful accounts, no, with a credit balance of 50,000. So we have to include that also because we have to present a net amount na in our statement of financial position. So we deduct 50,000 here. So the net amount to be presented in the caption Trade and Other Receivables shall be 1,600,000. So that is our total trade and other receivables to be presented on the face of our statement of financial position. The details of which, yung detalye ng ating components ng trade and other receivables, ito sila, yung mga items na to nakasama, makikita lang natin ito doon sa notes to financial statements. So that will be the end of this presentation, class. I sent you the activity in Creeper in relation to this topic. Please check it out. I have a special instruction there for you to comply. Thank you, class, and I'll see you in the next video for accounts receivable. Bye!